Okay, so it is with great pleasure today that I welcome you all to the first installment of our summer series of VAMP, Vanderbilt Modern Philosophy. And I'm even more pleased to welcome as our first speaker, Professor Richard Blum. For those of you who don't know him, he is Emeritus Chair in Philosophy at Loyola University Maryland. He was previously at, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Peter Patzmani Catholic University of Budapest. He's the author of many, many books on Renaissance philosophy, and in particular on Giordano Bruno, Nicholas of Cusa, and the philosophy of religion. So I believe that's what he's gonna largely talk to us about today. And without further ado, I'm gonna pass the mic, the virtual mic, to Richard.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be in this nice and impressive series. I attended a couple of them this year, and so it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about pantheism and speculation. Let me just explain the background of this paper. Is a project we have at the University of Olomouc, Palacký University in Olomouc, Czech Republic, with Thomas Nejesleba and Martin Zemla and also my wife Elizabeth, and in which we do some research on how pantheism and panpsychism worked out in the Renaissance and later. My paper is in part also exploiting fruits of research my wife has done, but she gave me permission to produce it here. So the title is Speculation in Nicholas of Cusa and Giordano Bruno, and subtitle From Natural Theology to Methodic Pantheism. Well, speculation. Speculation is what we call the outreach to such truth that is not in our possession or within our immediate range. Turning our attention to something to scrutinize it in detail, we call reflection. The notion of light received and reflected in a mirror is intimately connected with our understanding of human cognition. In the following, I will use the mirror metaphor as a touchstone to compare Nicholas of Cusa's and Giordano Bruno's theories of speculation. I will argue that the metaphoric of speculation and reflection without problems can move over to pantheism, because pantheism expresses the intellectual desire to explain the workings of the world with the help of something absolute, and at the same time to make the absolute accessible with the help of the correlation between the absolute and the relative. My emphasis will be on the epistemological outlook rather than any ontological or factual claim, as you will see. In the 1980s, the astrophysicist Carl Sagan was happy to declare that God is the sum total of the laws of nature. That is, in essence, a pantheistic approach. And now please allow me to share my screen. Here, works. Yep, okay. On the one hand, this approach helps to dismiss the notion of God in the field of sciences. On the other hand, it still appeals to something that is more than the sum of its parts. For the sum total is more than the sum of the individual particles. A typical statement along the same lines can be found in the medical scholar and atomist Daniel Sennert, 17th century. Okay, here we go. Who declared that once God has created the world, he ceased from interfering with it, to the effect that God's presence in the world is the laws of nature he has created. Once God ceased from creation, he instituted nature that performs the course of generation and corruption and guards and observes it. Thus, God concurs in the generation of all natural things qua first and universal cause. What then originates are immediate effects of secondary causes, which, however, receive their strength and power from God. These two are just random examples on how pantheism is expressed. There are thousands of things that need to be discussed, but you get the point. we talk about the laws of nature. We talk about God. We say yes, that all refers back to God, and then we close that religious cabinet and focus on science. The problem is, what is missing in Sagan's and Sennett's statements is the epistemological aspect of this kind of pronouncement. And that is what we can find in Nicholas of Cusa and Giordano Bruno, so that we can say that they transform the discourse on speculation into a method that can be understood to be pantheistic. Nicholas of Cusa. Speculation is all Nicholas of Cusa was writing about. As he confessed in his On the Sonship of God, the Filiatione Dei, the sonship, that is being offspring of God, defines and explicates such kinship as knowing everything, which is seeing oneself as the similitude of God. The status of being human is that of affiliation with God by way of speculating about things. The treatise on the sonship of God opens with the metaphor of magisterium. The human intellect aims at truth, even at mastering truth, being master of truth, or rather the art of truth, and yet the art itself is accessible only in the particulars of the world, the outcomes of this art. Once having learned this, the intellect transitions to the mastery of the world. I'm paraphrasing what you see there in Latin. In any mirror, Cusano says, objects are represented. I close the slideshow and I will come back, I will open it later. In any mirror, Cusano says, objects are represented according to the particular shape of the surface. In a plane mirror, forms appear of the same size as in the original, whereas in a convex mirror, they appear smaller. Now, the author suggests considering a plane mirror that reflects God compared with the creation, with the reflection of the Creator in the variety of creatures. The one would be the boundless and absolutely perfect mirror of truth that reflects God as our principle. The other reflection would be reduced mirrors, variously bent. Among those curved glasses, the intellectual natures would be living mirrors and straighter and clearer, and being alive and intellectual, it may be assumed that they are able to bend or correct or clear themselves. Se ipsa improvare, rectificare et mundare. First, a realistic reflection of God would be as extended as God, that is, perfect but infinite and not fathomable. Then there are the productions of the original that in one way or other reflect the producer, however distorted, yet recognizable. And third, there is the intellect or intellectual natures that mirrors, that as mirrors are closer to the original and even capable of adjusting. On his way to explain the kinship of humanity with Cusanus now invites the mental experiment or hypothesis suggesting to transfer the living intellectual mirror to the first mirror of truth. The effect is not, as one could expect, a transformation of the intellect towards the divine, but rather the mirror of truth pours itself over into the intellectual living mirror, to the extent that this intellect receives the reflecting ray of the mirror of truth, which is described as this living mirror that impresses the intellect as a living eye. Again, we observe the reversal of direction. From emulating the original on the part of the intellect follows the original conveying itself to the receiving subject. It is remarkable that in this passage, mirror is labeled living in two meanings. First, it is the human intellect that is alive and therefore able to rise up to the plain first mirror of truth. Then, after the mirror of truth has poured itself into that living mirror, the human intellect, which functions as the eye, this eternal mirror, is qualified as living. Therefore, the kinship of the human and the divine is only thinkable as an exchange that cannot be static, as the metaphor of mirror might connote, but dynamic and mutually influencing. Reflection is two-directional and continuous. In that sense, both the mind and the truth are alive. Cusanos' reader must have noticed that the mirror of truth has divine attributes. Therefore, it comes without surprise that this first mirror, the Word, the Logos, the Son of God, it is through this mirror that the intellectual mirror obtains the kinship or sonship and implicitly possession of God and all things. In the process of intellectual speculation, the mind opens itself to truth so that it can receive the understanding from truth. And in that sense, the speculating mind mirrors what it is seeking, nothing more, nothing less. Taking these considerations in a mood of piety, this may appear soothing and reassuring. But supposing that knowing the workings of the world should be the aim of knowledge, this insight that the mind stands in a dialectical relationship with the unconditional, to the effect that the validity of the mind depends on the mind's losing its grounding, this is rather discouraging, but is quieting. For the mind gaining access to truth appears enlightening, but the mind being dependent and conditioned by truth throws it back into the uncertainty it struggles to escape. Consequently, what started in Cusanos' treatise as a pious exercise, the meaning of kinship with God, escalated into a profound epistemological crisis that he translated into an existential spiritual exercise, an experience. From an epistemological and theoretical point of view, Cusanos appears to fashion something like a negative theology, that is, deliberations about the nature of God in terms of the impossibility to reach that goal and in terms of undoing the power of the human mind while stretching its reach to the utmost. If we understand these considerations in ontological terms, then we are left with the option to understand the divine as present in creation, because only by the presence of the divine mind in things and in the human mind, it is possible to even try to aim at the divine. This explains how the human understanding is tempted to move over to pantheism. These thoughts lurk in the background of Cusanos' writings about the otherness of the divine in non alio. In this book, the dialectical operation of subject and object is the major theme. The expression not other is presented as the key to understanding God. The definition that defines everything is not other than what is being defined. This opening statement works with the same back and forth between epistemology and metaphysics, and between the apparently concrete and its boundless foundation in self-reference. Therefore, it is fitting that the work bears the title Directio Speculantis. Speculation in the dual meaning of reflection and transcendent vision is also stated in the work Compendium, and I share my screen now again, Yeah. Where the human strive for transcendence is illustrated with the allegory of a cosmographer having completed a proportional map of the world. From the relation of the map to the true world, he speculates in himself as the cosmographer, the creator of the world. That is, with his mind, he contemplates in the image, the truth, and in the sign, the signified. The human mind ventures into the origin of the world by comparing known experience and productivity with the hypothetical ultimate truth, thus speculating about the unknown by way of mirroring the act of production into the transcendent and positing the self as an image and the indication of the ultimate reality. The allegory of the cosmographer emphasizes the turn of the speculator from the outside and objective to the subjectivity of the mind. Speculation and contemplation are self-referential in that the external experience directs towards the inside so that the objective world is reflected in the mind, and from there the sensible world directs the contemplative thought away from the self to the ultimate truth. We know that figure from Augustine. Again, if we read the compendium as an exercise in negative theology or semiotics, everything remains within safe doctrinal areas. But it is equally possible to understand the metaphor of the cosmographer and the comparison between the creator and the creative human mind as a confirmation that whatever is understandable in the world, it is understandable because it is the creation. It is the creation along the laws of the human understanding and creativity, so that we are safe to say that God is present in this world by way of his signs he left behind. As long as we read Cusanus' treatise as investigations into the workings and scope of human understanding, these writings also remain pious and unpretentious. But as soon as we transfer that into the reality of the visible world, there is only a small step from theological speculation to physical theology. And the basic methodological background of physical theology is indeed pantheism, as we have seen in Senate. It may be said that the mirror metaphor as such is the convergence of the concrete and the abstract. The mirror is what it is supposed to show, and yet misses it continuously and inevitably. The mirror metaphor is evidence that Cusanus acknowledges the distinction between the concrete, the epistemic, and the metaphysical realms, and that all his effort is to reconcile them. Notice 3 levels: the concrete, the epistemic, and the metaphysical. Ever since Johannes Wenck, who accused Cusanus of ignorance of standard theology, the suspicion of pantheism is possible when reading this speculation. Wenck noted that no, I'm sorry, too far. Oh, I thought I had. Let me see. No, I'm sorry. I thought I had a slide with Wenck, but it seems I'm sorry. it seems to have gone. So Wenck noted that the coincidence of contraries endangers God's claim to be unique and transcendent, so that nothing whatsoever can possibly coincide with him, and definitely not creation. And nothing natural can mingle with God. I'm paraphrasing what he said. Wenck admitted that Cusanus kept God and nature apart due to his theology of Trinity. And this confirms the methodic function of the speculation in Cusanus, which Wenck didn't understand. The coincidence of opposites is a speculation for the sake of explaining the apophatic method of the human mind to reach for the transcendent. It is not a positive theological doctrine. As a matter of fact, the accused replied that coincidence opens the way to mystical theology, he says in the Apologia. To say that an image coincides with the original would be insipid, and so the creation is not identical with the creator. However, it is right to say that every number is implied in the one, even though the one itself is not a number, and we understand numbers as dependent on the power of the one, Cusanus says. In other words, Cusanus guards his readers against mixing epistemological and methodical considerations, on the one hand, with factual and dogmatic statements. Now let us see how that plays out in Giordano Bruno. Every cognition or knowledge of whatsoever or whatever object is related to God, since for Bruno, truth is God and God is truth, and simultaneously the mind or the intellect, universal intellect, which knows itself. Let me see. Okay. Yeah. I quote, above all things, therefore, is the truth, and that which is above all things, though it were conceived according to a different understanding and named in a different way. It also must be in substance truth itself. But indeed, the one that you see with your senses and can grasp with the range of your intellect is not the highest and first truth, but a certain picture, image, and splendor of it. True knowledge is absolute identity, which is only possible in the one, the first divine principle of all. The eye sees other things, it does not see itself. But who is the eye that sees other things, thus that it also sees itself? He that sees everything in himself and who is everything himself. A finite intellect that functions under the conditions of the material world, space, time, and perpetual change, has no direct access to truth, no immediate self-knowledge, no complete intuition of any object. Quote, we would be similar to that highest reason if we could behold the substance of our species, so that our eye would see itself and our mind would fathom itself. However, the nature of what is composite and corporeal does not allow for that, for its substance is associated with movement and quantity. Hence, though we do not ourselves consist in something profound and, so to say, undivided, yet we can see certain outward accidents from our surface. And the likeness of the eye itself in the mirror, in the same way our intellect does also not perceive itself in itself, nor the thing themselves in themselves, but in some exterior species, likeness, image, figure, or sign. Evidently, Bruno continues the way of reasoning we have seen in Cusanus, namely, for the sake of explaining the understanding of the divine, he is taking recourse to the presence of the divine in the finite world. As Bruno's spokesman Philoteo explains at the beginning of On the Infinite Universe and the Worlds, truth is for us as from a weak beginning from the senses, but it is not in the senses. Rather, it is in the sensible object like in a mirror. What theologians say about seeing God as in a glass darkly, you remember 1 Corinthians 13:12, what theologians say about God, seeing God, extends to all human cognition universally, since God, that is truth, is both the first principle and ultimate goal of knowledge. So let us look for the mirrors to see where and what they are. The first chapter of De Imaginum Compositione is dedicated to the triad light, ray, and mirror. The first and clearest mirror reflecting the image of the creator is, of course, the sum total of his creation, sum total, the universe as a whole. Like its maker, it is perfect, but only as a whole, because no single part of it can realize all its potential simultaneously. It is like unto a living mirror in which there is the image of natural things and the shadow of divine things. However, exactly because of this fidelity, we cannot handle this mirror, which is nearly as difficult for us to see as what is reflected in it. The universe, or nature as a whole, is not only inaccessible to our senses, but also beyond the capacity of our rational understanding. When in Cause, Principle, and Unity, his interlocutor states that we can know God only by his traces, remote effects, garments from the backside, in a mirror, shadow, or enigma, you see again the same metaphoric for metaphor. Theophilo, that is Bruno himself, counters. See? Even worse, since we do not see perfectly in this universe, the substance, the main part of which is so difficult to conceive, we actually come to know the first principle and cause by its effect in quite less a degree than Apelles can be known by the statues he sculpted. For these we can see as a whole and examine part by part, not so the great and infinite effect of divine power. If we are willing to accuse Giordano Bruno of pantheism, we should admit that pantheism is a distant goal, at best, not a given. We find Bruno mostly studying that immense mirror and inferring its infinity from the presupposed and unquestioned infinity of its creator. And when he proceeds to demonstrate his new cosmology by geometrical optics, he makes use of smaller mirrors. Fortunately, we can see and learn also by shadows of shadows, mirror images of mirror images, and, quote, we find trace, likeness, and mirror infinity in all single things we see as well, end quote. After all, reflected light is often designated by the same word as the direct emanation from the source, and the source itself, as they used to call sun, that which warms and diffuses light, and subsequently that diffused light and splendor, which is found in the mirror and subsequently in all other objects. That was a quotation. It is important to notice that Bruno does not infer from the laws of nature the creator, but from the infinitude of the creator to the infinity of the world. One favorite mirror is the moon. You can see the motifs we have mentioned so far again. It is of the same nature as our earth, watery, not fiery, not sun, reflecting, not emanating light. Thence it can teach us things about our planet, which we cannot perceive directly, being too close to it. For the moon and all Earth-like planets likewise also functions as a mirror in reflecting the light of the sun. In the minimo, he says, the mind, the mind above all is God. The mind contained in all is nature. The mind that pervades all is reason. God dictates and orders. Nature performs and makes. Reason contemplates and discourses. God influences reason through nature. Reason is elevated through nature to God. So after having spoken about the fractured images of God in things, now he summarizes that we have three levels: the mind, nature, and reason. At this point, we can observe that for methodical pantheism, that is a pantheism which does not take the equation of nature with God as an escape route to assuage theological questions, but as a method to elucidate the workings of science and workings and the workings and structure of the universe. So for a methodical pantheism, we can see here that the parallel between the creator and creation has to be complemented by the notion of the intellect that keeps both levels together and constitutes a third level in which the parallel between the divine and the finite is justified, bonded, and solidified. The inevitable shortcomings of pantheism are turned into methodical advantages in a theory of science. After Cusanus had used a variety of shapes of mirrors in order to explain the variety of presence of God in his creation, Bruno uses it as an explanation of the finitude of human understanding of reality. We find an impressive passage about the convex mirror in the Lampas Triginta Statuarum, a mnemotechnical text that arranges metaphysical key concepts around major mythological figures. The description of the statues and their attributes are preceded by two triads that comprise unfigurables, infinite concepts, of which the first is the dark, ugly, or negative triad, and that is chaos, that is the void, the infinite space, hell, privation, and night, or matter. And this is the first figurable subject. More familiar and closer to our understanding of the divine Trinity is the second, or good and positive triad. The Father, the first mind of fullness, the source of light. The Son, the first intellect or light, who is at the same time the first individual or archetype, the substance of substances. And the third is the spirit of the universe, the splendor of light, love. It is the first intellect, the Son, who is described in as a spherical mirror. Imagine for yourself a sphere or globe that is overall like a mirror, that would be in the midst of things in such a way that all the forms and figures of things around the world join in it, thus they would rather seem to proceed from it. We are to understand how the images meet in the mirror globe, directed towards its center, and then to turn our perception inside out, so that the images flow from the mirror into the things. We will realize that the center of the globe, all figures in the center of the globe, all figures flow together into one, while when they proceed from the globe outward, they are multiplied and diversified. As a byproduct, we notice how difficult it would be to tell such a mirror globe from an actual primary source of light, the sun. In sum, as soon as a universal principle of all the world and everything in the world is assumed, everything may become a mirror reflecting the image of that principle. It is up to the beholder to decide which mirror is the best. The one closest at hand, the one closest to the reflected object, the one most diligently fashioned and prepared to render the clearest image. It is this choice we may call religion, tying oneself back to the origin. Giordano Bruno, and after him all enlightenment, went for the cosmic religion, considering the universe as a whole, the closest mirror to its maker, and taking into account the reduction of man to that tiny and almost indifferent particle of the whole. Nicholas of Cusa still held on to the mirror offered to him by the Christian worldview. The mirror closest at hand, the exemplary man in his direct relationship to God. This might be a slightly different angle to look at the unworldliness of Christianity, that claims my kingdom is not from this world, and states for what man is, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world? For the question of pantheism, it should be apparent that plain modern pantheism is speculation aborted. Even the accusations of pantheism against Cusa and Bruno were short-sighted conclusions. There is a need for positive teaching to reduce the lofty uncertainties and determinacies to teachable statements. Because both Cusanus and Bruno did not achieve any reproducible results. Hence, pantheism is either a temptation too strong to refuse or a method that aims for the impossible. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much. That was so brilliant and interesting, and I'm particularly pleased personally because one of the goals of these seminars is to tear down the barriers between different kinds of modern, pre-modern, early modern, late modern idealism. And so your talk and Karen's talk last time are the two opposites in a way, but they also happen to, in many ways, discuss the same topics. So I'm personally pleased about that. So as I open the floor to questions, I remind you all that I would prefer if you could join some sort of queue in the chat. I will be monitoring that. In the meantime, as we wait for people to work up the courage, I will ask a first question. So I was particularly interested in a third figure, which you obviously didn't mention, but that, to my mind, completes the triad, and that is Campanella, that in many ways is perhaps both politically and theoretically the most extremist of the three. But he has something interesting to say, especially when he discusses necessity, because he has this whole argument about how to discover necessity. And I think he would agree with some of what you said, that the idea of discovering necessity is inwards first, right? We discover the laws of necessity by observing how things act from their internal necessity and not as they're bound by external laws. And that is like a seed of God that's been left there. And so I was wondering if this discussion of regularities or necessity comes up also in the other two that you've been focusing on today.
I've troubles to remember now a specific case. I would say in both Cusanus and Bruno, what is in modern language would be necessity is discussed in terms of mathematics and geometry, yeah, because geometry is without alternatives. Yeah, you do it right, or you catch the proportions and the measurements and the dynamics of the geometrical laws, and then you also get somewhere. That's why Bruno tried to combine atomism with geometry. That would be a case. Campanella is, of course, later than both of them, and he has already a number of experiences in his in his formation, intellectual formation, especially with Telesio, who tried something like a secularized version of natural philosophy, and so that's where I would see the connection.
Right, right. Yeah, I was just thinking in relation to what you said at the beginning about how God potentially left, right, the world to its own devices, but left it with a purpose, right? There is this very strong image of teleology in Renaissance pantheism that kind of disappears in later instantiations of the theory.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is clear in Bruno, I'm sorry, in Campanella, but also already in Bruno, you have the notion of providence, which Bruno also explicates as prudence. Yeah, providentia is also prudentia, that is the foresight, but also in the sense of taking care of. And God's providence, put the seeds of what has to happen in nature by way of providence into the things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what was going on in my head as well. We have Alberto now.
Hi, Richard. Thank you for the talk. I enjoyed so much. And I have a question, or more than question, is a comment, or probably even more is, I would like to hear your opinion about this topic of pantheism. And well, from my point of view, when I heard pantheism in Nicolas of Cusa, I'm not completely sure. I know his approach to God is peculiar. And I was thinking, particularly in his work, the non-aliud, is, as far as I remember, is one of his late work, is 1460 whatever. And from my point of view, in that work, Cusa is to some extent more or less clear that he's not the pantheism, because on one side is more or less clear that he defends not an emanatism, but a creationist metaphysics. And he keeps, for instance, he maintains both the transcendence of the non-aliud, is what he's calling in this work. The non-aliud is God, is other say to say God, non-aliud, but he maintains the transcendence of the non-aliud with respect to the aliud, and the aliud is a creature, and to everything created. And the foundation of the aliud, of the creature, is the non-aliud, and also I'm not sure, but this is my opinion, he's pantheism because the non-aliud, or again the creature, creates, or God creates, allows that the aliud exists, or the creature. And because everything that moves in the sphere of otherness, of alternatives, he says, is aliud quam aliud. Is the other is creature as creature, or the other as the other. It's not God. So I would like to hear your opinion about this. I have here a quote, but this unfortunately is in Latin, and I don't have the translation in English. But I have here the quote, and well,
read it thoroughly, and we will understand.
And well, I here let me share. Well, here is all the quote in the chat, and well, I don't know. I would like to hear your opinion about this. You're mute.
Richard, I believe you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read that briefly. Yeah, but that's too long now.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's so okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, let me put it this way. If we Cusanos comes to very say outspoken results regarding nature. So, for instance, his idea that that presupposes that the Earth cannot be at the center of the world, that probably the sun is the center of the spheres. But he comes to that. In my view, always with this in ordinary language speculative approaches. That is, with his trying out how far we get with our human language and also with our human reasoning. But the aim is, his aim is to find God, to understand the divine, and to look at the limits of the human understanding of the divine from outside of the human understanding. So it's like, if you don't mind, it's like spitting on your own head. Yeah. And that is what he also is doing in the non-aliud, where he's stretching the language of other, nothing other but other, and so on. So I would say, although he comes to some interesting insights into the reality and nature, he still is using that as a step towards the divine, and not as a means to find a new physical theory. Does that answer your question?
Just, can you repeat the last part, because I missed a little bit?
Okay.
I think it's the key.
Yeah. So he doesn't use these speculations in order to find scientific statements about reality, but in order to use reality as a stepping stone towards understanding the divine.
Yeah, no, this part was clear. Just I was wondering, because your opinion, no? Because I think there are some passages. I mean, in my opinion, sometimes, of course, it's not very clear, the language of Nicholas of Cusa sometimes, but in my opinion, there are some passages with he's to some extent clear with the idea that, hey, this is the creature, this is God, and this is everything else. And there are like two moments: first step, second step, and they are in some ways made compatible both, but considering that ontologically there are very different entities. And this is my point. Probably I don't really know, comparing to Bruno, for instance, but I think in Nicholas of Cusa, to some extent, and probably in some works, because I never read the whole the complete volume, of course, but this is what I think. But well, thank you, Richard.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We could go on for forever, and yes, but yeah, his the unclearness of his language is deliberate. It's yeah, and he says that early already in his in his Concordancia Católica. He admits that he knows what good Latin is, but he uses the Latin he needs to make his statements, in this case of canon law, and in using that, in saying that, he is actually using a humanistic trope.
Well, I find it particularly funny because it reminds me a lot of Schelling, and I'm not with the whole non-aliud, so the negation of the alter in order to come back. And I'm not sure that Schelling knows what good Latin is. But on that, I will pass the ball to Karen.
This is really just I don't know if it's a question yet, but I was really struck by, I was thinking about Schelling and I was thinking about Schelling in the early Hegel and how I think I maybe didn't appreciate the extent to which they begin to build their philosophies by moving from reflection to speculation, and how deeply connected. I mean, of course, Schelling wrote a dialogue called Bruno, where he's sort of, he's speaking in the voice of Bruno, but I guess maybe, so if I want to put it in the form of a question, it seems that the way that Schelling, so reflection is sort of a lower, right? So we move through reflection in order to get to this higher stage of speculation. I also really appreciated what you said about the mirror metaphors, but maybe if I put it this way, it seems to me that the mirroring, the central things that are being mirrored in someone like Schelling is something about mind and living nature. And I really liked also what you said about the living mirror. So maybe the question is, do you see Schelling and the German idealists as basically just developing this thought that you outlined, because there are readings that want to go that emphasize or de-emphasize the sort of more Neo-Platonist aspects of how absolute idealism develops. I think there's a lot of people who stress the more Kantian influences, but now hearing your talk, it makes me think, okay, this is, it maybe more, I need to take much more seriously, I guess, these background figures that maybe I have in the past.
Okay, thanks, yeah. Well, first of all, I have to confess, I'm not really, good at Schelling and Hegel, but it is, the parallels are obvious. I mean, in secondary literature, I would refer to Werner Bayer-Walters, who has made this comparison of Renaissance, Neoplatonism, and German idealism. And historically, philologically, it is obvious that Bruno was rediscovered or was discovered in the pantheism debate with Lessing, Jacobi, Mendelssohn, and what they picked from Bruno was mostly what he himself had plagiarized or adopted from Nicholas of Cusa, and that's why then Nicholas of Cusa had a revival in the 19th century. So that is a philological comment. In terms of things, issues, both Schelling and Hegel are, of course, trying to get back to on their feet after Kant. In a Kantianist interpretation of Kant would make reality disappear, and they had to try to recapture that, and they took whatever it took that was, on the one hand, compatible with the advancements Kant had made. So, for instance, the Anschauungsformen and so on, that you could reread back into Cusanus and Bruno, but also then to make sure that there is still a metaphysics possible after that. And so that would be my comment. So I can only say this is certainly true, and of course also versions of pantheism, because also then we had this Pantheismusstreit with, as I mentioned, and other debates that were basically dependent on the pantheistic terms or turns that were made or tried in the Renaissance. And of course, just to be sure, the word pantheism is later, is 17th century, but the idea, so Wenck, for instance, speaks about simply about having God and world, God and creation coincide, yeah, having overlap, that is a term he is using. And there was no ism at that time, and no pantheism at that time, but it came up in the 17th and then 18th century in that meaning. There is some kind of plain overlap of the divine and the world. And my specific point, my specific interest is this, to make sure that most pantheisms that are popular today are actually escapes from meeting the question of the divine in a scientific world. And therefore, it's the easiest way is the deist version to say, yeah, God kicked it off, and then we retired. And another version, a more pious version, is, yeah, he is still present, and you see the divine in everything that happens. And that is usually philosophically pretty lazy, yeah. And that's why I was doing this, what I was doing tonight, to show whatever sounds like pantheism in Bruno and also in Cusanus is actually methodical, is actually epistemological, and not a ontological statement.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Next, we have Laura.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Blum. Can you hear me well then? Yes. Okay. I'm having difficulties in trying to rephrase this in a question. I have so much in my head right now, and I've been working as well on the mirror metaphor, and I found this fantastic, this talk tonight. I wanted to say that I found it personally very difficult to try and keep apart from each other the metaphysical, like ontological and epistemological senses of the mirror metaphor, since there is this meaning of mirror and speculation, and we think about something in the sense of something more epistemological, but also mirror as image, and we think of image of God and reflections of God and so on. And also I see in Nicholas of Cusa is yeah, sometimes you just find both meanings at the same time when he's using the mirror metaphor. And he talks about, yes, we are images of God, and because of that, there's something that we can see in ourselves as how can I tell that? Yeah, because we are images of God, we can have some kind of idea of the truth, and we see the truth through the logos and so on. But what I wanted to say, I also see there is some, if we can trace this line to Schelling and so on, maybe an interesting point is to find Leibniz in the middle of the way, as Leibniz also conceives the monads as some kind of, he speaks of monads as living mirrors, and these living mirrors are tiny points which contract the universe in an individual point of view. And we can also find in Cusa this idea of the individual, but I'm not sure if it's individual or not, but of the contraction of the whole universe in a specific point. This is which also let us raise a question: how is it not the universe in the individual if we find this contraction of the whole universe in the form of this individual point? Okay, I think I've said a lot of things right now, but well, if I guess I could make two questions about that will be done on the one hand, and I'm thinking that maybe on the connectivities right now, if it is possible for us to acquire the truth, or if it is just some kind of asymptotic movement that keeps some kind of distance to the truth itself. Or sometimes when I read the book, I have the feeling that we see the truth on the intellectual level, but we cannot express it in a rational way. But that would be a very Neoplatonic reading of this book. But if I see this kind of difference, like we see the mirror the mirror itself can't reflect all that is, because the mirror has some kind of limitations, like the curve or like the not very polished one and so on. But I don't want to make out of Cusa a proto-Kant or something. So I struggle a little bit with that. And the second question would be, is there really a place for individuality, as Leibniz would think about an individual being for Cusa? And I don't know about Bruno. And if we're thinking about this contraction, or if the image we are of God as humans is something rather as a species that is an image, but not of the individuality. So yeah, that would be then. Thank you very much.
Okay, I hope I can I hope I can at least give a few ideas. Yeah. First about the notion of mirror. The fantastic thing with the mirror is indeed that it is itself something, and it refers to something, and this something is not really in the mirror, but there are things that are not accessible except through a mirror. And then comes the third position, and that is the position of the viewer. Yeah, the the viewer is looking at the mirror, and is realizing for himself or herself as a viewer that even to him the mirror as an object, as a thing, is meaningless. Just a piece of a shard, a piece of glass. The mirror has only meaning for the observer if the observer gets to that other thing that is not the mirror itself, but it is somehow in the mirror. Yeah, and that is the fascinating advantage, cognitive advantage of the mirror. Now, if we now look at things like monads, the point is then that the visible reality has to be something like the creator or the principle of it, although it is not itself the principle of it. Yeah, the tree is not the principle of the tree. Yeah, but it still allows the observer's access to the principle of the creation through the creation as a reflecting, as showing somehow the real thing. And that is why Bruno already came to the notion of the monad by saying, so if there is one principle throughout the whole reality, it must be something like an atom. Yeah. So he has three kinds of minima: the atom, the physical atom that composes things, the mathematical point, that is the starting point of any extension of any magnitude, at any quantity, and then the monad, that is that same thing metaphysically. Yeah, and therefore the monad in itself represents already everything that can be made out of monads. Yeah. And that is probably what Leibniz picked up, probably with many other influences. I personally don't know, but that is a trick. And when I look at the secondary, which I did a long time ago, secondary literature about Leibniz monadology, I see a lot of contradictions and inconsistencies in the interpretation. But when I look at it from the Bruno point of view, that makes total sense to me, because everything that is in the creation is a full representative of the creator that is, of course, in there and not in there. Yeah, so that's how I would phrase it, and therefore, yeah, so that would make sense. Let me see the second question. Didn't catch word, please. Your second question.
Yes, I guess the second question was about the individuality, or maybe that was the first one. Yeah, the other one was more about Cusanus, whether we can achieve truth, or it stays in some kind of asymptotic movement and just some kind of approaching to that never reaches.
I see. He says clearly that, for instance, geometry is perfect, but in reality, there is no perfect geometrical quantity anywhere. Yeah, and that is also one of the reasons why he debated the Ptolemaic system of the planets, because that would presuppose that there is a perfect mathematical structure of reality, which he says isn't possible because mathematics is one level higher than reality. So maybe that would be sufficient at this point. Thanks. Very interesting questions.
Okay, from the chat, no, there's not a question, but Jason Alexander remarks that the compendium, I think we were still on monads. The geographer metaphor captures a similar sort of dynamic. We still have some time for questions.
If I may add something.
Yeah, of course.
The cosmographer is really one of the key passages to understand Nicholas of Cusa. But another one is, of course, his De Visione Dei, the opening metaphor, or the opening image of the image of Christ looking at the observer from wherever the observer stands. So on the one hand, you have God being everywhere in some way, but on the other hand, also you have God seeing every individual everywhere. Yeah, and that is two matching images, I would say. So thanks, Jason, for this idea.
Okay, so I think I wanted to ask another question, so I will abuse my power here. I was wondering one thing that I always think about whenever I see, well, late medieval, especially Pantheism. As we agreed, the label is a little anti-chronological, but yeah. So in the big Paris condemnation by the Dominicans that officially outlawed Pantheism from the Catholic Church, there is something that was a trigger for me in your talk, which is negative theology, right? So it seems that a lot of people got to Pantheism through negative theology, at least during the Middle Ages. And I was wondering, especially under this kind of neo-post-Platonic, I'm not sure I want to call it Neoplatonic because there seems to be a lot of overcoming. So maybe post-Platonic is a better label. But yeah, under this kind of I don't know, framework, is that something, the materialist temptation, is that a strong temptation considering where they're coming from? Or do you think it's this association with speculation as the mind thinking is enough to get it off the ground?
To get pantheism off the ground, you mean?
to get their theory off the ground without having to deal with materialism as a way down.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm not quite sure. I don't know enough of dogmatic history, but I can imagine that negative theology can verge into something like pantheism, because the world is all we have, and therefore we capture as much of the world as we can, as long as the negative theology does not remain strictly, let's say, epistemological, and really refrains from making ontological statements. I remember that, for instance, Lefebvre d'Etaples, obviously, after having read Ficino's interpretation of Dionysius Areopagita, insists on the mystical meaning of it, and the meaning of piety. Yeah, and one thing you can observe in Ficino's approach, Ficino's Neoplatonism, is that indeed Christology, and generally speaking, Trinity, but especially Christology, including incarnation, is kind of in the background. And Lefebvre d'Etaples responds to that by saying, no, Jesus is the most important message we have. Yeah, and that is the thing that is unfathomable. And so let's not go down and make things easier. So yes, I would say Neoplatonism was certainly I'll say the Neoplatonic interpretation of Christianity in the Renaissance. Yeah, I mean, Neoplatonism has always interpreted the Christianity. I mean, the entire theory of Trinity wouldn't be possible with the apostles alone. Yeah, and yeah, but the Renaissance, say, revival of Neoplatonism had the tendency to rationalize the negative of the negative theology, and therefore to open the door towards something like a secularist interpretation of the divine, and from there then also to something that would turn out to be pantheism.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this meeting today was really back and forth on the whole history of philosophy. So it was a perfect exemplar, kind of a monad of what we're trying to do here at VAMP. So if we don't have any other questions, I'm gonna go ahead and thank Professor Blum for sharing his wonderful paper with us. So before I let you all go, I wanted to make a quick point of order, which is that we are going to miss the next session that was going to be on Spinoza because of technical difficulties of our speaker. But don't worry, we will have that session just later on in September. So the next time that we will all see each other here on Zoom will be on July 7th, when we will have Jacinto Bonifaci, who will talk on Neo-Kantian critical method. So we will jump to the other end of the spectrum of modern philosophy.
We stay in the trajectory. Okay, yeah. So yeah, again,
thank you all so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for attending, and thanks for very interesting questions.
See you all.